Good afternoon. I'm Nancy Greenwald. I'm the Executive Director of the Construction Institute, and I want to welcome you to the fifth and final spot in the AEC Leadership Conference. It's really been an interesting journey, our collaborative leadership journey that we started with front-end alignment with Ava Abramowitz, and then we learned from a team at Wexford that does collaboration remotely, and we learned some skills and some ideas around that. We moved on to understanding where technology can support us and perhaps where it can't support us in terms of collaboration. And then this Monday we had communication skills with Ava, again, Ava Abramowitz, and we were able to test some of those communication skills in a negotiation example involving some dangerously bad work of one subcontractor. And I hope you all enjoyed and learned from that exercise. Today we have the pleasure of hearing about Brown University's collaboration journey and its use of integrated project delivery. And yes, the clicker works, okay. Our panel will be introducing themselves shortly, so I won't go into the details, but Mike Guglielmo from Brown, Ron Simoneau from Shawmut, Eric Tellender, and the irrepressible Tony Messina from Whiting Turner, who is one of our wonderful planning committee members and is our moderator for today's program. I want to thank our wonderful sponsors. Whiting Turner is our panel sponsor for today. E2 Engineers is our reception sponsor. Dimeo Construction Company is a sponsor. AP Construction Company. Viking Construction Company. Antonazzi Associates, also in the house. Oh, wait a minute. Fuss & O'Neill's being difficult. Okay, Fuss & O'Neill. Thank you to Fuss & O'Neill for sponsoring the program as well. And we are really privileged to have a number of associations who support what we do as we support what they do. So thank you to ABC Connecticut, AIA Connecticut, the Connecticut Concrete Promotion Council, the Connecticut Ready Mix Concrete Association, the Construction Users Roundtable, of which the Construction Institute is the New England Council, SMPS Connecticut, and our media sponsor, High Profile Magazine. Thank you to our annual sponsors, Milo Tango, Interstate Electric Services, IMTL, Tucker Mechanical, and Pratt & Whitney. And of course, thank you to our wonderful planning committee, Jim Cecil. Hands up, Jim. Thank you. And Caitlin Doberfull, who is in California and not with us today, who have been co-chairs of this program. Mike Ailes, Mike. Tiffany Cartier, and Tony. It's been an incredible pleasure working with this group, putting together what I think has been one of the best programs, content-wise, that the Institute has put on since I've been here. We have AIA learning units and CCM recertification points, so if you're interested in those, please let us know, and we will take care of that for you. So now I would like to turn the clicker over to Eric and turn the mic over to Tony to kick off the program.
Okay, so good afternoon. Again, I am the shortly Tony Messina from Whiting Turner, Vice President out of our New Haven, Connecticut office, been with WT for 26 years. Have the pleasure of moderating my first and hopefully only panel. We have a group of phenomenal individuals up here who are going to give a great presentation on the use of IPD and the collaboration efforts at Brown University. From the meetings that I've had with you guys, I think you're going to see a lot of chemistry amongst this group of panelists. Hopefully I can ask the right questions at the right time, and then if anyone in the audience has questions, please work with me, okay, at the end of the presentation. We'll wrap those up. I'm going to try and repeat anything so it's audibly usable on the recording, and recorded for future use. Okay, so from me, turn it over to Michael.
You want to just introduce
Just-
yourself?
Oh, sure. Michael Yelmo, Vice President, Facilities, Campus Operations at Brown University. Been there a little bit over 24 years. Prior to that, I spent some time in an architectural office, and then prior to that with a small design build construction manager.
Ron Cimino, I'm Executive Vice President at Shawmut. I'm also our National Education Market Leader. I've been with the company for 28 years. I'm working at Brown, doing work for 23. Yeah, I've been involved with numerous design build and IPD jobs.
I'm Eric Talander with William Ron Associates, Associate Principal. I've only been at William Ron Associates for 20 years now, so worked on a wonderful project with these two gentlemen at Brown, and we primarily focus on institutional projects across the board, working in from traditional procurement all the way through full IPD for institutions like the Cleveland Clinic, so a full range of delivery methods. So hopefully we can share some perspective.
All right, real quick, show of hands. How many believe that the way that projects are typically delivered today is a broken process? Okay, it's pulling out the room, so I'm not going to have to do any heavy convincing here, it seems, but I'm going to share some data. I'm going to go through some data that Mike's going to go through the Brown journey. So, in 2004, a professor from Stanford named Paul Teicholz did a study on productivity, and it was all non-farm labor industries. What he discovered is that since 1964, all industry had more than doubled in productivity with the exception of one, construction. He redid the study in 2013, came to the same conclusion, which is really mind-boggling when you think about all of the advancements that have been made in terms of technology and prefab in our industry that really have had very little to no impact. So why is that? As we start to dig in, we can compare it against an industry that we can think of as highly productive, like automotive manufacturing. But what productivity comes down to is reliability. So can you rely that your materials are going to show up on time, they're going to be the right quality? Can you rely on your workforce? Can you rely on your machinery? Can you rely on your commitments, that people are going to meet their reliable commitments? Toyota, probably one of the most studied companies of all time, actually stated that their productivity, 70% of it is attributed to incremental increases in their supply chain, which is amazing. We could probably take a page out of that and apply it to construction, but instead, let's do the reverse. So if I'm an owner and I'm going to build a car, what am I going to do first? I'm going to fire everybody and hire an architect, hire a contractor, hire subs, hire all my, my manufacturers and my materials, and start from scratch. If you did that, if you build cars that way, imagine what it would cost to build a car. Imagine what that would do to the automobile industry. Yet that's exactly how we approach the building industry. So we're going to tease out that concept of reliability in terms of reliable commitments. So the Lean Construction Institute did a study and determined that only 54% of all project commitments get carried out as planned or as promised, which means that 46% don't. So let's tease that out a little bit. So if Eric here is supposed to be done on Wednesday with his tasks so that I can come in and start mine on Thursday, I show up on Thursday, Eric's not done, I've got to send my crews to other projects, that adds cost, it's waste, it gets factored into my overhead, it gets added to the project cost. So how does our industry cope with that? Eric's supposed to be done on Wednesday, I'm not even going to plan on being there till Monday because I don't believe him, because history tells me he won't be done on Wednesday. So we build in these buffers, and that just continuously adds from trade to trade to trade, from activity to activity. So we're building waste into our projects. There is a solution. It's called Lean Construction, also coined the last planner. So Glenn Ballard and Greg Howell developed Lean out of the Toyota production system, took it from the automotive industry, and developed the Lean Construction and then trademarked it as Last Planner. And Last Planner is a system of processes that endeavors to take that 56% or 54% reliability and ratchet it up to something like 85 to 95%. And when you do that, the likelihood of your projects being successful is exponentially higher. We're just going to run through a few studies that kind of support some alternative project delivery, but Dodge Data and Analytics did a study, and what they were trying to determine was what made a best performing project a best performing project. What were the factors that contributed to that? So they put out a survey to a bunch of owners against all different market sectors across the country, hundreds of projects, and they asked for examples of typical projects and best performing projects. And they were trying to really zero in on what were the factors that contributed to the best performing projects. First, they asked the owners to design value. So I don't think there's any surprises up there. Schedule, budget, safety, and quality. That's how the owners were really defining value. Then they looked at the projects, and projects that were delivered using traditional contract models, i.e. design, bid, build, probably some CM at risk. Only 70% of those projects were delivered late, and 73 were over budget, which is scary when you think about they only asked for the typical and the best performing projects. They didn't even ask for the worst performing projects. They also looked at projects that were delivered using highly collaborative models. So this would be design build, this would be IPD, and especially looking at ones that used a high intensity of lean. And those projects were 3 times more likely to be completed ahead of schedule and 2 times more likely to be completed under budget. They also asked to identify what was the single most important factor that contributed to the success of the project, and overwhelmingly, the owner said it's the team. It all comes down to the team. So I'm going to bring it home with one last study here, and so this was the Design Build Institute of America commissioned FMI to do a study to try to determine how much design build work is out there, how much construction. And what FMI came up with is that by 2025, 47% of all construction spending will be delivered using design build project delivery, which is pretty amazing. 16% highways, roads, 31% buildings, which is really what I care about. But the point here is that it's not a fad, it's a trend, and it's picking up momentum, and it's not going to go away. And I don't know about everybody else in this room, but my company has seen it more and more on projects from different clients. And then lastly, design build has 2 different, and I'm using design build and IPD kind of interchangeably. I mean, they have a lot of the same types of collaboration, a lot of the same tools. The contract's different. We can probably get into that during some of our discussion, but there's best value design build, which is basically the owner puts out a set of bridging documents and the respondents submit a proposal that includes the balance of the cost to draw the project because the design's already done, and then to build the project. And then the last one is progressive design build. And progressive design build is where you pick a team based on qualifications and fee. So again, you're handpicking the team, which is i.e. the most important factor to a successful project, and then you work with that team to progress through the design to a GMP and build a project. So the owner stays involved in that process. They get the design they want at a budget they can afford with a successful outcome.
Thanks, Ron. So a little bit more. There we go. Can you hear me now? Perfect. So a little bit more about why Brown. Why are we talking about collaboration journey? So one of the things when I started at Brown over about 24 years ago, we were doing design bid build, and we were just about tipping our toe in the water of CM at risk. It was what I would coin at that point in time the traditional rock fight. We were constantly looking at design drawings to make sure that we were covering all the missed scope, so forth and so on, and we were always chasing RFIs and change orders. We were always at risk of projects being delivered on time and then on budget. We moved along in this journey from that more traditional design bid build to CM at risk, and then with the CM at risk we started doing design assist. And this is where I would have to say the door truly opened up into the collaboration aspect of high-performing projects. The first one that we were dealing with was with Shorma Design on the Dillis Perfidio project here, the Granoff Center at the lower left. What we had discovered as we were going through design is we were never going to make the schedule based on a traditional CM at risk delivery. We needed to order material early in order to meet our academic calendar, and that's critical. In higher ed, we need to complete those projects, whether it's for the spring or fall semester. By bringing in that trade partner, not only did we see the advantage of having the design team put their pencils down at the end of design development, We also had certainty in delivering one of the biggest scopes of work, which was the entire envelope on budget. At that point, it was about a $40 million project, 5% or 5 million or 25% of it, 10% of it was associated with just the facade. At that point, we knew, again, we had to release the material. By putting the design team in a room with the trade partner, Karas and Karas, we were able to work through shop drawings at the end of DD to release material before construction drawings were done and enable the trade partner to start fabricating those panels to meet the schedule. We learned as a result of that, not only could we control budget, we could control schedule, and we also saw an increase in the quality of work. We took that to the next step with design build. And what we were realizing as we began our design build journey was that compression of schedule. And you say, well, what does that mean? For the university, who has limited resources, by overlapping that design and construction, in some cases we were reducing 3 months, 6 months to 9 months of a project schedule, which is real money in escalation. So that helped us not only from the supply chain, it helped us from cost certainty. Now, we clearly saw the value of bringing those design partners together with the trade partners early on in the process. The next evolution was IPD. Within the integrated project delivery, we were obviously a little concerned. This is something very new, but we were seeing the benefit of breaking down the silos with, the trade partners and the designers. We did a pilot, which was a small project in construction terms. It was about $14 million, but it was a highly technical work. It was basically all mechanical, electrical, and chiller plant replacement in an active research building. We had to have zero tolerance for downtime, zero tolerance for any impact to the ongoing research. By bringing those trade partners around the table, it was pretty fascinating. We had essentially done implementation drawings versus full construction drawings. Having the designer of record sit next to the trade partner, they were solving the problems real time before they got into the construction out in the field. So what we were learning as part of this process, that competition was not guaranteeing us schedule, competition was not guaranteeing us quality or budget control, but that collaboration really brought us to that next level. So in higher ed, very risk averse, how do we get to convince people that this is the right way to deliver projects? Well, first of all, we built trust. We built a lot of guarantee and certainty in the fact that the result of having that highly collaborative delivery, we were able to ensure taking this next step that we had that long track record of success. We also brought in experts, and I don't know how many of you have worked with Howard Ashcraft or have heard of him and his contracting method with IPD. Having him around the table to meet with our general counsel, to meet with our risk office, really began to daylight the benefits, but also to explain that the university would also have some risk with certainty of the overall budget in the IPD. How many people are familiar with IPD? The key is engaging those resources, but I think you heard earlier from Ron the fact about building a team. What was really unique about IPD is we're not going out to solicit particular firms or any firm in the open market. We're literally asking the highest qualified, the most qualified people to come to the table to help us execute not only the design of it, but the construction of it. And highly, highly selective, making sure they have the right mindset, the right culture, and also have lean practices embedded in their organization. One thing that's very unique about Brown, all of our project managers and planners are all trained in lean principles. So that helps in, again, wringing out waste and some of the other aspects of target value design and truly understanding design, build, and IPD. I know this is an eye chart, but what does this mean for Brown? This is a metric of all the comparisons of the sampling of a handful of projects that were completed. Starting at the far left is CM at risk, and then moving all the way to the right, IPD. But a couple of the metrics that were really concerned for us was driving down RFIs and change orders. And as you move across this kind of spectrum from left to right, you can see that the RFIs and change orders dramatically reduce. In us, for our perspective, that was reducing risk and reducing cost. Drawings were doing the same things. We were spending less time drawing, and we were putting together just what was essential to go and pull a building permit. And the team was jumping right into shop drawings. The other thing that we were looking to solve was quality. And as you toggle across probably the middle of the page, you see that major rework issues continue to trend down as the value or cost of a project goes in. And then this is the big takeaway for us as a university being with limited funding. We're constantly looking to add the most amount of value into the project. How do you do that? We're reducing RFIs and change orders, and as a result, as we move through the design and construction process, and I'll talk about some of the tools later, we're able to put value back into the project for the same exact construction cost. So say it's a $25 million project, if we're able to add in another 10 to 13%, that's a significant game change, whether it's a mechanical system that's being upgraded or it's program space that's being added back into the building. So that's what we've experienced as we've moved through this collaboration journey.
And the pretty pictures.
Want to say a few words about the project?
I think we'll talk about the project. This is the project that we all worked together on, just to state it. It had all, I just want to dispel any myth of like that trajectory that Mike described leads to one solution. You're still working in all those formats.
Correct.
So it really depends on the type of project and what you're trying to do. It's not everything has to be IPD and fit one model. It's actually what's the best delivery method. And all the projects have the same complexity that you run into with every other project. Changes in administrative paradigms. This had 2 donors, well, technically 3 donors, because one donor decided to split in the middle of the project. And how do we recognize all 3? We had the issue of health and wellness combined with housing, and we had delicate neighborhood relationships and elementary school across the street, and all the logistics that you would normally expect with any particular project. So it's not a one-size-fit-all, but it's an approach and a mindset that I think we want to talk about today.
One thing I would add to that particular project is the fact that it was built during COVID.
Yeah.
And, based on.
Oh, and that.
And that, right? And it was delivered early to our advantage that we were able to actually use it for housing students a summer in advance of the fall semester. And we had, as a result of COVID, had transitioned to a 3-semester scenario. So not only was the project delivered on time, we were able to take advantage of the bed revenue earlier than planned.
All right, you guys are making my job super easy. So I'm just gonna sit back. I'm gonna ask a couple questions to them. I think we're gonna cover a bunch of different topics, so hopefully we're gonna answer a lot of the questions that you would have. I think we're gonna get into the good and the bad associated with this. We're not just gonna sugarcoat it for everybody. So first and foremost, we talked about team. Team is the most important thing. So Eric and Ron, how did you, as both of your firms, select the right team members to function in this IPD world? Because I can tell you right now, and I've got a bunch of people out there on the table, not everyone, including myself, okay, I think could just easily jump into an IPD project, just based on 26 years of worth of the way I've been doing things in life up to that point in time. So how did your firms deal with finding the right people, finding the right subs, finding the right sub-consultants, and bringing them to the table to ultimately help out Brown?
I'll jump in first. I mean, our office is lucky that we have a collaborative design approach we mostly do institutional projects. So we already have built in this sort of culture of collaboration, which is much easier to build into a lean and a collaborative mindset to start off with. But you're absolutely right. You can't just pick everyone in your office and assume they're gonna flourish in this type of environment. I think, Mike, you hit on it. There's a training element. There's a kind of lean principles. Forget IPD, forget the contract structure. There's lean construction principles that I think really getting people to understand and have some baseline training of the terms and the approach. And there are little switches that have to happen. And we'll probably talk a bit about those, like thinking of what are all the advantages, not a pro-con, just what are all the advantages? How do you move the ball forward faster, better? But a lot of it is also being very mindful of who you're putting in the room. And there are two things that I would say is, one is agency. Whoever's in the room as part of an IPD project needs agency. That doesn't mean they need to be all principal level people, but they need to be empowered to make decisions. As soon as you get someone who doesn't feel that, it all falls apart. So that's one thing to think about. How do you empower people to have that agency, even if they don't necessarily inherently feel it? I think another is really thinking hard and talking to the individuals who are going to be on the project with your traditional sub-consultants. So, a project like this, we have major consultants, we have minor consultants, and we really had to talk about not just who, but who on their staff would be actually involved in this. And that was a discussion that you normally don't have. You kind of have relationships that you know, but not relationships that you know that are built on a project type. So those are two things that were particularly unique.
I would say from our perspective, I think it's easy to get your head around collaboration when you're talking about the three-legged stool, the owner, the architect, and the CM. We all, Shawmut doesn't do a lot of design bid build work. We do mostly CM and design build. So that level of collaboration exists among our teams. One of the things we've done on just about every project is we use a personality profile, like a lot of other CMs. We've been doing it for 30 years. And we'll do a team personality assessment at the start of a job to just understand how people like to process information, how they communicate. It's really enlightening to really kind of understand, and it's a good team builder. But when you get outside of that three-legged stool, where the challenges are is when you get to the consultants and the sub-trades. The sub-trades live in a world of competitive bid, even in a CM at risk scenario. So getting their head around collaboration is challenging. But to Mike's point, in an IPD job, you're not bidding the work. You're selecting it's a qualifications-based selection process. You're handpicking the trades. You're handpicking the foreman and the project manager from that company. So you get the resources of the company, but you get the actual individuals on the job that you want, which really sets yourself up. You're creating a dream team. And you got to be really selective on who you bring into that circle of trust, that ICL pool, because one bad egg can take down the whole ICL. And so you want to evaluate who's coming in. Are they really going to add value? Can you do without it? And you want to be really selective about who those people are.
I'm going to add one group that, in thinking back at the start of the project, once we had the team all assembled, we had all the office accountants on a call. I'd never done that before. I think I've done it now once since then. So that all the cash flow and billing got all synced. And it goes back to this idea of trust. So yeah, billing would fall behind periodically on one thing, but there was a clarity to the process. Everyone was part of that call from the office accountants on our design team. It sounds really weird, but all of a sudden we had an incredible amount of transparency and trust with relatively small consultants. That was an odd little thing we did. We've started doing it more on other projects.
Okay, so obviously as the client, right, you're helping this process, you're steering this ship because you're going down the IPD road, okay? As opposed to the conventional, bid, build, all that great stuff. So Eric, from your point, right, you're now gonna be dealing with a team and managing set-based design, right? So a lean process, theoretically allowing constantly flexible design options to progress, right? As your client is feeding you input, your contractor is feeding you input, you're dealing with market conditions, labor conditions, donor conditions, funding, right? How do you, from a design firm, manage that whole process of set-based design, and how did this team deal with that?
I think we had a number of things, both lean principles, but also just tools that we used collectively. And I would try and say one of the things was part of that pull planning and mapping out what decisions need to be made when, really helped inform it, but it was also what design decisions need to be made so that there was a level of engagement on, we're not making decisions about the finishes. You know, everyone talks about that, but we literally mapped that out. And in that process, and we'll probably harp on this a little bit more repeatedly because it's a consistent example, we identified the structural system very early in the project as a critical path item that actually had to do with the aesthetics, the budget, the schedule. And we ended up doing a whole bunch of matrices early on. And we had charts about how much you buy and what we needed to commit to when. And I mean, we engaged at the trustee level. I mean, it's the same sort of thing where you still have to present to trustee boards. You still have to engage with planning departments. And so we actually were out in front of a lot of those discussions saying, okay, well, we're gonna commit to a CLT hybrid project. And that allowed us to eliminate ceilings in the end in the bedrooms and allowed us to not have to wait for cure times for concrete, but it sets up a whole bunch of decisions right away. So we then were able to build quite literally off that decision sequentially. And it enables you to have a lot of flexibility on what other choices can and should be made, so that when all of a sudden something like a major pandemic arose, we could be a little bit more nimble about not just the design solutions, but how it was actually being delivered and procured, which changed some of the detail.
Thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I just say that set-based design, I think the idea between set-based design is you progress the various alternatives forward, and then as they don't make sense, you drop them off.
Right.
But you want to get to that point where you're making a decision as quickly as possible, obviously, so with the least amount of drawing. So the CBAs that we would use in the project, choose by advantage, is a new tool, and I think that really helped to daylight the advantages, and it's not pros and cons, it's all about identifying what the advantages are, so you don't get kind of end up double counting. But if you went back, can you go back one slide, here's the clicker? Because one of the things I think that's interesting, if you look at the last two rows there, so the last planner, so the jobs that use the last planner, you can see that we've got the construction PPC, which is percent plan complete, and then the design PPC. So, you know, we're talking about trying to ratchet up to 85 plus on you can get there on construction. It's a lot harder to get there on design because things are a lot more nebulous, right? It's around decisions and, you know, the hardest thing to do, I think we all know, is getting the owner to reach a decision, especially about something major like structural system when it has cost implications.
And when we say owner, we're not talking about Mike.
No,
We're
no,
talking
no.
about the
Brown is
nurses
very
and the
good.
wellness. We're talking about, we should probably highlight, we have all this technology, we're talking about technology. We made simple block models. And I know Ron was looking at me when we first came out with the block models, like, what the hell are they doing? But it was all about getting people who are not architects, not part of our trade, to actually understand and make the right decision at the right time. So they weren't looking at a rendering and saying, I don't like the red wall. They were actually responding to, oh no, I want that block next to that block. And it was an incredibly low-tech solution, but it was all about trying to get that, okay, what is the sequence, what are the decisions we need to make, and build that consensus, because as much as the last planner logic works, you really need, when you make a decision, you need people to hold to the decision. So they need to have understood the decision they made. And that's actually, takes a lot of thinking through and planning and making sure the people who need to make that decision actually understood what they were doing. I have teenagers at home, that's not easy. So it's the same sort of logic with clients. We just assume none of us as architects can read plans. Why do we expect our clients to read plans?
All right, now, switching, I think the budget has come up, right? And really, you've talked about it, you have a target budget. You know, in a standard, normal contracting method, we know what your budget is, we competitively bid everything, we put together a GMP, a lump sum, great, we move forward, right? Here, you're still designing, you're still making decisions, you're still getting contractors on board. How do you maintain this target budget? I think when we were talking on the phone the other day, you know, you brought up the point of, you know, you guys are savvy, there's a lot of savvy people in the room, right? We can do forecasting reports on a weekly or monthly basis, but subcontractors, you're lucky to get a yearly financial statement from them, let alone understand how they're tracking daily and weekly and monthly cash flow. So how did you work in the target budget world, especially considering you are in a relatively small state, with a limited pool of resources to build these very complicated, amazing projects?
Are there any subcontractors in the room?
No, you're safe.
Okay. I've come to the realization that most subs don't realize whether they're making or losing money till the end of the job. So, the level of sophistication in terms of cost forecasting is not there with a lot of subs. I mean, there are subs out there that are good at it, but the vast majority are a disappointment. But, a project like this, for instance, this was a design-build project. It wasn't an IPD, but it's the same target value design is the same in both delivery models. This project was budgeted using a developer benchmark, so it was a developer-built, competitively bid housing project, grad housing, and with much different mechanical systems than what the university standards were. But that was the budget with some contingencies and so forth, and then it moves forward through a validation phase where you're onboarding your subcontractors and you're working as a team to validate, can we actually achieve what the goals of this project are for the budget that was established? And there's a lot of puts and takes there. There's a lot of big ideas that get put on the table. There's a lot of big ideas that get killed at that point in time. And you arrive at your target budget, and that target budget is accompanied by a basis of design. So everybody understands it isn't drawn yet, but we understand what Eric and his team is going to put on the drawings, right? So, right, Eric?
Until we change it.
Yeah. And yeah, so you manage against that basis of design, but it's not stagnant because of all these stakeholders. So there's still programming and design meetings happening with multiple stakeholders, and they're all daylighting good and valid ideas, but they may or may not necessarily fit into the budget. So what we're doing is, as an idea gets daylighted, it gets estimated. So there's this constant rolling estimate that we're going through, and it gets put on a log, and then once a month we make decisions. Can we fund it out of the project? Does it get funded out of owner contingency? How valuable is it? There's a charter that's established at the beginning of the job that really determines what the values and the goals of the project are. And all those ideas are really measured against that. Are they advancing the values that we established at the beginning of the job to create a successful project? That's truly what target value design is. So if it doesn't have value, it's really wasted. It really doesn't belong in the job. So that's the process. The subcontractors do play a big role because they're at the table, obviously, especially the ones that we bring in design build or design assist, there's a level of ownership, especially with the design build trades at certain points. We try to onboard, especially the MEPs early, the envelope trades early, and they will own a budget at a much earlier stage than getting to a set of GMP documents, sometime around DD. And that's how we manage it.
I would have to say, just to add to that, from an owner's perspective, the subcontractors that we have seen that do this really well fall into two buckets. One, as you had mentioned, the group that does a ton of design assist, and that's typically around either the MEP trades or the curtain wall. They get it, they work, they tend to limit the budget, and we saw that on IPD. The other groups are anyone who is embedded with lean within their organization, and that's typically around the MEP again. They're looking at whether it's a ductwork fabricator, they've wrung out all the waste in their facility, and they tend to have high PPCs when they're out on site. So there's definitely some good ones there, and then there's the ones that they wouldn't hit a mark if they tried. And it's typically, I would say from an owner's perspective, has been around the electrical, and then the other one is the steel erectors. For some reason, depending on the complexity of the project, they tend to struggle.
Not to give away your trade secrets though, but I think you also mentioned in one of our calls is, I consider you a sophisticated owner, client, where your budgets seem to be more realistic from day one, right? As opposed to some of the developers that we may be working with throughout this room, where, they set something 10 years ago, right? They're trying to hit the return on investment, okay, and it's just unrealistic. You guys, I don't want to give away your confidential secrets here, but you sounded like you went through a thorough process and didn't hit a number, but hit more of a range, So you gave the ability for these two to be successful, right? They were working towards something from day one that was achievable.
That's absolutely accurate, and one thing that's probably unique for us as an owner, we're highly transparent. We share from day one, here's our budget, and that literally starts during a feasibility stage. So if we go through a feasibility, we're identifying a range based on past benchmarking. We have a pretty sophisticated database where all of our core centers are rolled up in there. If we're looking at building a 50,000, 100,000 square foot building, we're beginning to organize what the range of that particular project might be, whether it's $1,000 a square foot all the way up to $2,000 a square foot. We're able to have those intelligent conversations with our senior administration. When we approve a project to go into design, we typically ask for a range. All we're asking for is design, and that's about 15% of the overall project, but we're saying we're gonna lock down the budget at the end of schematic design, and you're gonna say, why? Well, one of the things that we have learned is by having that 5 to 10% range on, say, a $50 million project, having 5% below, 10% above, gives us the flexibility to add program that might not have been considered during a feasibility study or during our benchmarking. Past history has shown that we've struggled to land exactly to a budget that was approved before schematic design. So that's been kind of a game changer in our world. But again, having that transparency along the way from day one when we're assembling the team, all the way through to schematic design and then to final closeout, I think is probably unique for an owner to be that involved in that process and that transparent throughout the course of the time.
All right, so we talked about cost, we talked about budget a little bit, we talked about forecasting. In this IPD world, right, this is a collaborative group working together. You make money together, you lose money together. How did your firms work with managing your burn rates, your staffing rates? I think we threw out some concepts that, initially, right, a lot of design time, but because you're working with these guys and steering that design in a direction, and you're doing a much more knowledgeable based scoping and buyout, right, with the subs. It might make his job a little bit easier on the CA side during the course of the job because he's answering less RFIs, but then it's a huge ramp up at the end because you're now delivering this thing so much faster maybe, but to a higher level of quality that, his services need to account for that, but you've also need to account for that in your staff and your supervision. So how do you manage the burn rates for your staffs as opposed to us in the conventional world just saying, I've got locked in general conditions, I've got locked in general requirements, I know what my duration is. I don't worry about him in the design world, right? Because hopefully he's doing well. If not, well, hey, Mr. Owner, you didn't buy him outright. So how do you manage those, and what are the challenges that you may be able to give some advice to this group?
I'll start. One thing that had to happen on this job was the constant recalibration. So even on the budget, we developed a chart early that was just a bar chart I think we used uniform map just to make it simple, but it was very simply, okay, we bought structure, like there was a cost certainty line that just slowly moved up the bar chart. Like, what have we bought to date? So we're no longer adjusting those values. You can't VE the last 10% of what hasn't been bought at that point, right? So that sort of works with all of our staffing, all of our discussions. The staffing flow was very different on this job than I think how we traditionally estimate it, and it caused us to question how we estimate, quite frankly. And part of that goes to the whole notion of agency and having the right people in the room and making sure those people are involved all the way through. I can't suddenly have a whole bunch of junior architects doing, room data sheets and door schedules ad nauseum because we don't need them. We're buying it already. We've already moved beyond that. But I need more senior people on site in the meetings making rational decisions right there and then. So from a cost dollar model, it was pretty consistent with how we estimated. How those dollars were spent was very different. And when they were spent was very different, aside from the rush at the end because we were delivering 3 months early and we need to get students in the rooms. So it's a different flow. I wouldn't say that every job would be that different flow. Every job will be different. What it changed was how we model and constantly readjust and recalibrate in our office. And that's the lesson learned there, is you really have to be a little bit more nimble in how your staffing works internally to respond to the type of workflow that you're dealing with.
For us, we've got a lot of experience doing these types of projects, so we have historic costs on what it takes in terms of level of effort. I mean, I think the big difference is for a CM is on design build or IPD is the level of commitment you need and the resources during the design phase. So, having a superintendent in the room, you have to go to all the design meetings because you're responsible for the design now. So there's a much higher level of care from the construction manager's side, which does add cost on the, to the pre-construction side. But if you know that going in, you account for it and it's pretty easy to manage. And then on the back end with construction, time is money. The best way to make sure you come in on budget is to make sure you come in on time. So I'm gonna go back to PPC and Lincoln on that one.
Okay, so I think the bar chart showed it through your history of projects. I don't know if we explained it well enough, but you didn't do a jump from CM at risk immediately to full IPD. You've had some progression as a university, right, as a client. I'm sure you guys have done that from a CM, and you guys have done that from a design firm. Knowing that, right, all of us in the room, what kind of lessons have been learned during this design build IPD collaborative process, from your side, from your side, from your side, right? So we get the three different angles, because I'm looking at it saying, I need to find a savvy client. If I have no experience in it, but I have a client that has experience in it, and I know my team member as a designer has experience in it, I think I would be successful. If my client had no experience, but I had all the experience and you have no experience, I don't see that being very successful. So all of us in this room kind of want to understand what are the lessons learned, what are the takeaways that you can help share with us?
One of the first ones I would have to say is it's definitely an iterative process. It's all about the team and the people. There were times when we had the wrong people around the table that we should have voted off the team earlier. And as a result of not really addressing that, and that I would have to say is the greatest aspect of IPD, you have that ability to say, change that person out because they're just not a great fit. In a traditional contract model, we don't have that luxury. With IPD, there's the three of us sitting around the table and we could collectively make that decision. So that I would have to say team is the biggest aspect. The other one is decision making. Having decision making at the right level. Where we have struggled, full disclosure sometimes, is certain decisions, and that's mostly related to governance within higher ed, need to go to a trustee level. If we were able to pull that out and literally have most of the decisions at the team level, I could really see us take IPD to the next level. So just having to keep that integrated within, the governance structure of higher ed and IPD, that is a constraint. I think we've been pretty good at navigating it, no matter if it's design build or IPD. Fortunately, just because of the internal structure we have and the trust and the confidence that we have with senior administration. But there's many tools that we use along the way to help navigate those decisions. We're always forecasting when a decision needs to be made. So you get back to the last planner system. Our trustees know that by this date, in order to meet that schedule, we need to make the decision on the facade. And we're introducing pieces of it early enough so when it comes to the decision date, they're able to give the nod. Same thing with any of the major financial decisions that need to be made. So I think you heard from me about team, you heard about the decision-making process, and voting people off the island if they're just not a good fit, whether it's from a design build or an IPD project. You have to do that.
I think, it's not rocket science, right? I always say this industry isn't rocket science unless we're actually building rockets, and we haven't built one yet, so. But I think anybody can be trained in how to deliver these models. One of the things that Brown did 2016 maybe, released a RFP for a strategic partnership. Combined a bunch of projects, like 10 jobs, it was like $400 million worth of work, and wanted to work with one CM to kind of organize a program around these jobs. And we were fortunate enough to have won that. But there's such a steep learning curve to really build the skill set and the muscle memory to understand lean, to understand design build, to understand IPD, all the tools, how Brown works. And the whole concept was create these teams of specific individuals from our company, consultants, subcontractors, and these weren't just companies, they were the actual individuals from the companies that got trained, that Brown was able to, one of the things I've heard in the past was that facilities can pick the contractor, but usually the trustees pick the architect. So, you're gonna get an architect, a star architect out of New York or wherever, right? And drop them into a high-performing team, people that have done this over and over again. And it totally improves your success rate for sure. So it makes it a lot easier, and having the same, I'm gonna go back to that whole automotive productivity slide that I showed you, right? So having the ability to not have to blow the team up every time and start from scratch is the secret. That is really the secret, because you take what your team collectively learned from the last project to the next project to the next projects, so each delivery gets a little bit better.
Okay, now hold on before I go to you.
Okay.
Does that potentially pigeonhole those individuals on that team to only work at that university? Or is it easier to bring in people to train younger staff members into the program and let those more seasoned individuals phase out of the program because they want to do different things with their career path?
I would say there's value in keeping them with the client, right? And obviously the client sees the value. You have to wrestle that with retention, obviously, which is, a problem for all of us today.
Yep.
So if they want to move on, they're gonna move on one way or the other. So you gotta be able to have a succession plan. So you constantly need to be training people and kind of bringing them up through the program, and on that skill set. And it's those people can go on to other projects, and even if it's not design build, a lot of the tools, most of the people that have worked in these types of projects don't ever want to go back to doing it the old way. They're just so used to that level of collaboration and, to use Mike's word, not going to a rock fight every day, that everybody's working towards the same goals, working in unison, including the subcontractors, that these people want to take those values to the next project as well. So there's a benefit, I think, to actually cycling them through onto other, accounts and projects. But I think that, there's obviously a value to keeping a core team there.
Yeah, sorry, I had to throw you the curveball.
Yeah, all right.
All right, all right.
So Tony, you asked a couple questions there in your lead up. I think a good client is critical to the whole discussion. To not have the good client, in terms of a participant, in terms of a believer in lean, at the very least deeply incentivized. So, IPD comes out of the hospital world because they're deeply incentivized to have that type of structure. Once you leave a lot of those types, or the your Barris and Holly project, once you leave that typology, it starts to get a little wishy-washy as to what the motivations are other than efficiency. And so you really need a client who's knowledgeable and can do that. I wouldn't jump to an IPD on a residential house for a high-end client. It's just not the best method. Your consultants, everyone's gonna not be ready for it. Having said that, I would say, don't wait. Don't wait for the great client to come along. Actually start training staff, actually start thinking about lean methodologies, actually start incorporating this with how you work every day, actually talk to and develop those relationships with all your consultant team. Develop and harbor some of the partnerships like we've built over years that everyone has, but actually think of them in this sort of lean framework of the structural engineer you work with or the this you work with. Actually develop some of these lean methodologies, start doing pull planning at your internal consultant meetings. You don't need to wait for a full team to have that type of conversation going on. And then when the right client comes along or the right project that demands it, you're primed and ready, you already have some of that thinking going. If you just wait till the project, you're gonna be flat-footed and you're gonna be caught behind, you're gonna be sitting in that room going, oh my God, who needs to be in this room? Whereas if you started implementing those and you started thinking about it and you actually have, you were mentioning way at the beginning, how do you pick the right team? If you actually can identify in your office who are some of those right people before that client even walks in the door, it's amazing how you can be nimble enough to jump at that. And, I go back to the interview we had for Brown, these two guys were at the interview, right? Shamit was part of the interview committee, trustees were part of the interview committee, campus facilities was part of the interview committee. So once we were chosen, it started. There was no okay, now we're gonna do 3 months of training to get you all up to speed. It was like, no, we chose you because we think you can handle this. Here's the deep end, let's go. And so don't wait to just get pushed into the deep end and learn how to tread water. Start swimming.
So I think we hit on some of the topics during the presentation, but as the client, right? Safety, quality, the value add, right? What's your biggest benefit from the university's, side of this technology? It sounded like it was value add, because I think if you're already hiring competent contractors and designers, your safety, your quality, your interaction with jurisdictions, is pretty consistent amongst the group. But is it the value add? Is it the strong relationships? I have to believe that this sort of project style has built relationships both in your worlds and your subcontractor worlds and your subconsultant worlds and your vendor worlds that are probably stronger than our standard competitive bid process where we're fighting everybody against each other. So where does that lead you guys?
There's probably three things that come to mind, and the first one I was talking about, we were really good at cost certainty and schedule certainty along the way. Where we were struggling a little bit with was quality and that value add component. So this really opened the floodgates for us to up the game on quality across the projects and that additional value add, which you could see within the metrics there. But the true benefit of this is to the far right on this screen, the strategic partnership. I can think back to times when we were working on a program level. We had 3 IPD projects happening at the same time. Originally, it was supposed to be 1 IPD project and 2 design build projects, but we said, hey, we're training people on this 1 IPD project. We reached out to the 2 design firms on the other 2 design build projects. We said, do you want to learn about IPD? We'll bring everyone to the table together. And as a result of that, not only did we see the advantages across the 3 different projects from people just working with the same mindset, when we're having conversations about decision-making and other aspects, they understood, so it made it easier for us as an owner. But then with having the 3 IPD projects, and due to the fact of that contract model, one of the projects was falling behind a little bit. We were able to just go from the other 2 projects and say, we need the electricians and mechanical contractor on this project. We're willing to let that one slide a little bit. And there was no paperwork involved. It was absolutely fascinating because of the contract model. We were spending more time, as we have gone through this journey, building buildings than writing emails. And we discovered a long time ago that you don't build projects with paper. So that's been a total game changer along the way.
Thoughts from your end, guys?
I hadn't thought about this, but when you mentioned retention, I was thinking about the project and the relationships that were built on a project like this with some of your consultants and the individuals and the kind of general pride and happiness on having worked on a project in this type of relationship. It's easy to see the benefits in a longer term within an office that I hadn't really considered before. It's kind of tangential to the product itself, but that whole group is actually ready to move into the next project, and ironically is working on a CLT project right now in Denver area, and it's actually the same Randy, Lauren, Cliff, myself. Not on an IPD structure, but using a lot of the same methodologies. And that's just internal to our office, forgetting even the broader scope.
Okay, so knowing that well, I think other than two people in the back, none of us have really done IPD projects, right? Maybe we've dabbled in the knowledge of design build, but we haven't really engaged in them yet. What are the strategies or techniques that some of us normal folk can take from you guys and do our baby steps to incorporate this into our normal daily lives, whether it's through some CM at risk? You know, I think you said get your teams starting to get trained in it, right? Maybe, you know, look at poll planning, right, for your schedule. I think some of us do that already. I like your point of, instead of us constantly doing pros and cons for everything in the design, right? Let's look at just advantages, right? What can we pull out of your processes and use in our daily lives as we transition to this 2025, when we're gonna start seeing more projects in this design build IPD world?
There are a lot more resources out there in design build than there are IPD, in terms of training and so forth. The Design Build Institute of America is a phenomenal resource. They have a whole certification process. They have an online library of videos and training. It's a fantastic resource. Lean Construction Institute, same thing. For a long time, the AGC was the only one that really had a certification program on last planer. LCI just launched one. It's equally as good, but they're tremendous resources as well. Those, if you get familiar with those two organizations, and you can use Lean and you understand design build, IPD is really the next step, and IPD is about the contract. So it's a different contract. So it takes, in design build, you still have individual profit centers. Your subs are still in lump sum agreements. Maybe they're we do put a lot of the larger subs, especially if they're trade partners, in GMP agreements, if you can get them to agree to that in this market. But for the most part, they still have individual profit centers. In IPD, you don't. You have a combined profit center, at least for the people that you pull into that ICL pool. And it's the IPD is design build on steroids. It's a whole different animal. There's a lot to it. It's a lot of work, but it can have tremendous benefits and tremendous outcomes. But I think the easy things are really just get up to speed on Lean and get up to speed on design build, and then you're ready for it when it comes. I think that the owners are the ones that are going to change the industry. So and what we're seeing is a tendency for owners to go design build. Very few have really the fortitude to leap into IPD.
The one thing I would add is everyone in this room could be doing Lean with every single one of their owners. There's no excuse why you can't. I think that's where you could help move the needle with the owners. Once they see the benefit of wringing waste out of a project, we have Lean champions within our daily operations at Brown. Every single one of the groups that report to me, we're constantly looking at plan, do, check, adjust. What are we doing well? How can we wring that waste? Within our logistics group, there's a Lean champion embedded right in that group, looking at each one of our areas. So not only do we do it on our construction projects, we're doing it on daily operations across campus.
I would concur. I would focus on Lean as a starting point, as the entry logic to getting into all this. The construction contracts change dramatically in each of the aspects, but the Lean principles are constant. I think the other thing is actually from the design side, starting to think about, where does design build and design build, enhanced design build, whatever format, people think design build has to be maybe what we did, which was you had the contract, we were a sub to you. We work across the nation in design build constructs where only mechanical is a design build. Only the facade is. Civil site is design build and nothing else is. A whole hybrid of what those are. And then you get into design assist and design build. So it's a whole spectrum. The framework that supports all that is really on this collaborative approach and being able to integrate. How is it documented? How do you cut the waste? How do you get to decisions properly? Once you start, it's not just learning the terminology, but start implementing it more consistently, then the roll into different contract structures becomes much easier. And IPD is much less threatening at that point. Not necessarily to your legal team when they first see it, but just to say it.
So that was gonna be my next question, because I think we only have one attorney in the room. And we'll turn Michael's mic off. How was the contract? Like, I know that, you know, and I've got 6 or so people out there that are from our firm, that we are extremely risk adverse. So signing up to an agreement, regardless of who the client might be, okay, with this understanding that we have this corporate responsibility, this collaborative responsibility as a team where, you know, you're part of my profit center, the subs are part of my profit center. That is a whole contract style that we are just so not currently used to. You know, I can only imagine how many people in this room would be able to sign a version of your contract in a design build or IPD world and not have to spend a year and a half negotiating terms, which I'm assuming you guys don't accept qualifications or provisions, so,
No.
okay. So, how did it work?
So, you're not gonna get rich and you're not gonna get broke in an IPD job. So if you're an electrician, and so there's an auditor that comes in, they're gonna look at your books, the last 3 years. And they're gonna look at what was your overhead and what was your actual profit. And they wanna separate those, and it's for a reason. And then you get the average of what that is. You are guaranteed your actual cost plus your overhead. So if you're an electrician and your average winds up being 10% overhead, 5% profit, you're guaranteed your actual cost, every hour spent, every dollar spent on material, plus your 10% overhead, your 5% profit is what goes into the pool at risk. So everybody puts their profit in. If all the profit's gone, you're still never gonna wind up in the red. So it's got some safety nets that way, but, you know, there's not as much upside, I think, for the design build team on an IPD. But it's got tremendous advantages in terms of what it can unlock the potential in the project.
At the end of the day, it's the owner that takes on the most amount of risk in an IPD, because there's no guarantee at all. We just keep paying and paying and paying. So this is where it's important to have the right team members around the table. Unlike any of the other contract models, you know, we get into the daily rock fight after a certain amount of time. And, you know, it's unfortunate, but that's where it goes.
Mhm.
So, you know, we're pushing the risk down to the design build teams and the design build contracts, seeing that risk, all that risk is going, you know, in that direction. IPD, we're taking all the risk on. But the rest of the team in IPD is incentivized. We've had success on projects. I would have to say our greatest success in IPD have been the highly technical MEP infrastructure projects where ICLs always increased. When we got into one-of-a-kind buildings, it's a little more challenging. I think those would have been challenging in any delivery model.
Okay. We've exhausted my list of questions, other than one, and I think we've kind of semi-covered it, but, you know, you said that your staff is really trained up and integrated into lean construction, where a lot of our developers and clients are probably not. What are some of the other techniques that the university and your staff are utilizing on a daily basis, right? Whether it's in these programs, it's other aspects of your campus life that lean has been able to help you out. Right?
There's a suite of tools that every single project manager has access to. So it doesn't make a difference out of any project that we're delivering. On an annual basis, we deliver about 120 projects. And within those 120 projects, they're using those same set of tools, whether it's a risk register, whether it's a decision matrix, whether it's a project dashboard, and those are shared across the entire portfolio. So the benefit for us is its consistency across, and I don't know how many times you've worked with the same owner multiple times. They're not having very consistent tools there or decision making. One project manager uses this format, another project manager uses that format. What that has benefited for us is we can make timely decisions, people know things are happening, but also sharing in full disclosure, full transparency. Here is not only the design team's risk, the construction manager's risk, the owner's risk, is all on the same sheet, and we're all managing to one bottom line. So having that as a tool is just a total game changer, because we're breaking down those silos at that point. It isn't the owner against the designer or the owner against the builder. We're all in it together. And that doesn't make a difference if it's CM at risk, design, build, or IPD. We're using those same exact tools.
I was kind of laughing because you were talking about the rock fight, and I was thinking, it's not as if there isn't conflict in an IPD or design build, right? There's still a lot of haggling that goes on, but it goes from being the rock fight at the end to like a daily thumb wrestle. It's like the stakes are lower, you're in close, and you lose some, you win some, depends on your first move, but it's like a constant discussion. And so it's not, these structures aren't about eliminating conflict, because that's just inherent in getting a project built. But it's actually making it more of aligning everyone. What are we talking about? Why is it important to you? Why is it important to them? What should be the prime goal here? And I think it's important to recognize that, because it's not about it just becoming so kind of passive. It's actually, it requires a kind of constant level of engagement. So.
That higher level of alignment, though, leads us all to the same conclusions.
Yeah.
A lot easier.
Yes.
I want to open it up to the audience here. Hopefully we've covered as many topics as we could, but I'm sure there's some tough questions out there. Anybody got a question?
I'd like to ask you a question just to clarify a couple of things. So you mentioned the shared pool, and that is the ICL. So I just want to make sure that everybody understands that. When they're talking about ICL, they're talking about the shared profit pool. But the second thing, that's the second sort of very unique characteristic of the IPD contract is the mutual waiver of liability. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Stepping back to the ICL for a moment, and I'm sure we weren't clear on this as I'm thinking back, not everyone is invited to the ICL. There's only certain trade partners and design team members that are part of that ICL, and that, I would have to say, is probably one of the other biggest lessons learned. Trying to bring someone into this highly collaborative format, if that is not how they do their day-to-day business, so if they're doing 99.9% of their business model is lump sum, trying to get them to move to IPD is going to be a challenge, and I think we tried to coach a few firms for success there, and that was a struggle. If we were to do it again, we would be like, no, leave them in commodity, that's where they work their best, and that's how they enjoy working. Getting back to the mutual waiver, once the trade partners that we invited to the ICL and the design team understood that aspect, they were all in. When they figured out, everyone sitting around the table, we could not sue one another, they were like, okay, so I can't be sued, I can't sue anybody, and I'm gonna be guaranteed every hour of work on this project, including my overhead. The only thing I have at risk is profit. Let's do it. And I think if you would ask some of the firms who didn't walk out of these projects with profit, would they do an IPD project again? The majority of them would say yes. Some of them we wouldn't ask again, but the ones that I think were highly effective and understood the difference in the way you work, that's the only way they want to work.
I think the most interesting thing about the different types of contracts are the barriers that they break down. So if you look at, we'll start with IPD because that's what the question was based on, but when everybody agrees that you can't sue anyone else, right? Think about what that does in terms of enabling everyone to use the BIM model, right? We're not into that, who owns the model, who's liable for any mistakes. Everybody's liable, right, in this type of contract, because essentially what you're forming is a single corporation with multiple departments, the same bottom line, as opposed to multiple bottom lines and multiple companies. In design build, obviously all the liability rolls up to the builder. The architect maintains design liability, but it all rolls up under the builder's liability insurance. But what it enables you to do is have the designer focus on the information you need to actually build the job, and less about what they need to draw to cover their ass. So it changes the mindset, and I've always said that an architect that really understands design build can make a lot of money, because I think that you have to draw a lot less. You leverage the subcontractors, you leverage the shop drawing process, and you know, if you're savvy in that world, you can make a lot of money and be very successful.
So no more electronic authorization forms to be signed to get the freaking model, Eric?
I still have to scrub all the options that are, like the 53 options out of the model before posting it, but no.
Sold me, I'm done. Okay, anybody else? Questions?
How much more demanding is the IPD delivery method on the design team as far as how responsive they need to be, how quickly they need to run through design decisions that have been made by the collective, stuff like that? Is there more demand for them, or is it kind of the same as a design bid build approach in that regard?
I'd say there's more responsibility in having the right people available to make that decision. I'd also say, and if they can plug their ears for a moment, I used to just yell out 12-hour rules sometimes where emails would come across, and I'd say, just sit on that email for a moment, because things were happening so fast, it was actually maybe not an issue. It was just something that was coming up, and what you needed were people, people really needed to be engaged with the project daily. So it was a little hard to be nimble in an architectural firm where you could pull people in to staff up for a while and then put them on something else. That was a little harder to do because people really needed to be enabled to make a decision that was rational, and they had agency to do it because it was a real decision that was going to be implemented right away and it had impact. So this goes back to having the right people. You know, not everyone can do this. We have a practice where we kind of make everyone go on site, whether they like it or not, because we think that makes you a better designer, and that feeds right into design build IPD. If you have a lot of staff who've never been on site and never seen how it's actually gone together, to Ron's point, it's maybe less about drawing every single thing exactly how it needs to be to make sure the flashing was correctly assigned to the aluminum curtain wall sub and not to the waterproofing sub. It's more about what was the design intent, are all the components working in the right way, and when the RFI or when the question comes, you're able to actually understand what the question's about and why it's being asked and resolve in real time. And that's a slightly different skill set than just documenting and drawing form. Does that make sense?
Yeah, if I can just add to that too. So two things. Because I had the benefit of seeing, working with multiple design teams against, both design building and IPD. What I heard consistently from the design teams is that, especially IPD, but both design build and IPD, is more work up front, less work in the CA phase. So like to Eric's point earlier, different distribution of hours, pretty much the same allocation of total hours. I will say that one of the things that changed pretty dramatically is prior to COVID, all of the big rooms were in person, right? We'd have huge big room sessions. It was very costly. COVID kind of blew that all up. We had to disband big rooms. We had projects that actually were in design during when COVID hit. And now we're in a hybrid mode. So it's, there's some in person, a lot of it's done virtually. So I think that's one of the, the silver linings of COVID is that we've kind of all morphed into this virtual mode. But I think that in itself has helped with the efficiencies as well. So there's a lot less traveling if the architect's traveling in from, whether it's Boston, New York to Rhode Island. There's, you try to have a lot of time traveling and overnights and stuff. So it's helped with cost, it's helped with time. Design bid build, the architect just draws whatever they want. They put out a set of drawings, we bid it, and so it's a different animal. But when you've got a whole room full of people, subcontractors providing input, everything's kind of real time, and I think there's just it's a lot more robust dialogue because things are being challenged in real time. So spend more time up front.
For subs in the ICL with all of their costs and overhead guaranteed, how do you incentivize schedule?
I mean, schedule is one of the components, so, I mean, there's cost, there's schedule, there's quality, there's achievement program, I mean, it's all kind of part of it, so if a subcontract, well, and let me back up too, lean is a big part of it, so what happens with the subcontractors on the construction side, I mean, you guys have all seen the images of, there's a foreman up at the wall, putting a sticky on the wall, and there's another one that follows behind him. They're making commitments to each other. So I'm gonna go back to, Eric is supposed to be done on Wednesday, so that I can start mine on Thursday. When Eric's not done on Wednesday, we're in the trailer going, what happened, Eric? You know, it's, you know, so, and the subcontractors that have skin in the game know that if they're not performing, everybody else is gonna pay. So there's a huge kind of, you know, guilt factor involved in it as well.
When they're standing up there and they're saying it's gonna take me a week with a 5-person crew, and then someone's gonna come on the backside of them, they're making that commitment. And like Ron said, if they don't do it, then they have to stand in front of the whole room and say, hey, we didn't make schedule.
And the whole reason why lean construction is called the last planner is the foreman. That is the last person that touches that work, you know, before the crew's put in place. So the biggest takeaway from last planner is not just the ceremonial stickies on the wall, it's what's called the constraint log. So the actual foremen are looking at, all right, I have to get these activities done in this time frame. Is there anything that's gonna prevent me from doing that? And identifying what those constraints are, and we track it on a log. And we're trying to identify those constraints as early as possible so that we've got the time to resolve it. So it's either design information that's missing, or is it a piece of equipment that still needs to be procured, hasn't been delivered yet? It prompts the foreman to actually go to their project manager and say, hey, what's the status with this? Because we know that he's gonna provide an answer at the next pole planning session. So, and then there's also daily huddles that happen at the end of, at every workday, where our superintendents talk to all the foremen, did you get everything done that you're supposed to get done? Yes or no? If not, why? And what are you gonna do differently tomorrow?
The other key, I mean, that is summarized at the end of every week with the PPC.
Right.
Right, so we're trying to always trend at least 85% PPC.
Let me give a subtle shift though, than maybe what you might have been hearing versus I know what we experienced, and that's, you know, Ron was saying, I need to have my drawings by Tuesday so that somebody could start on Wednesday. But as part of the pole planning, the person who's starting on Wednesday needed to provide me information a week earlier. So they're actually invested in the whole process. Like which system are we using for the waterproofing so I can provide the details for that Tuesday? And you need to give that to me here because I've got labor that needs to set up to get you those drawings by Tuesday. And when you start to map that out, it's not, I'm just twiddling my thumbs waiting until somebody, whoever that party is, designer, other consultant, shows up and delivers and then I can hit go. They're actually invested in, oh shoot, I need to think about this here so that that can happen, so that I can do this. And they understand the workflow and they know that, you know, oftentimes it's like, I can't, even though the information might be ready here, I can't start here because this trade needs to do this here. And they're part of that decision tree. They're suddenly invested in holding up their end of the bargain, not falling and having everyone turn and say, what the hell were you doing Wednesday? Where were you? You know, because all of a sudden that responsibility is transparent and understood. And it's kind of, it is a little bit like an odd form of peer pressure in a way, right? It's like, I gotta show up.
Or you get voted off the island, which is one of the benefits of IPD. Yeah, we've done that a few times.
I have a question for that, actually, Ron. So you talked about voting him off the island. I'm all about relationships. How early in the process did you find a relationship in this situation didn't work, that you had to vote someone off the island? And how did that impact schedule and that kind of thing? I mean, I think in the front end, if you could decide that, right, you can keep going because you're nimble enough. If you get further into the project, it can be somewhat challenging.
Can I answer that first?
Yeah.
Because
Yep.
It's probably slightly different from the construction side, but we had a number of design partners that were voted off the island even before they set foot on the island. They got onto the boat to come to the island and we're like, yeah, no, sorry. I mean, it's that easy right up front to kind of realign and readjust based on the expectations. And those were easy conversations, right? Those are conversations that happen in our industry all the time. Not even in an IPD structure, just there's a personality that isn't gonna align. What is much harder is when you're in CDs and you're having to have that conversation. Or you're somewhere else down the line and you're having that conversation. With an IPD structure, even design build, those conversations are enabled to happen because it's very clear where the kind of disruptions are happening. And so it's much easier to track. We're having weekly discussions about where everyone is. Somebody's not delivering, we gotta act. We can't wait 4 days, a week, we gotta act now.
Is that a collective decision too, Eric?
I don't,
It
can
say,
be.
Yeah, yeah.
doesn't have to be, I guess.
I mean, you have individuals who are designated at the PMT level, project management team, where they can make that decision. And if they're not comfortable making that decision, then they'll bring it up to the senior management team to make that decision. I think where we've seen it be the bigger challenge is when you hear after the fact, when the individual might leave, because maybe they went to another job somewhere else. They're like, why did we put up with that person for so long? Which is unfortunate. Like, how can you get that out from the team earlier so it could be addressed, I think is one of the bigger challenges.
Right.
And what we've seen more recently too, well, at least during the Great Resignation, is where you have individuals who have been around the table for so long that they leave a company. Losing all that knowledge is very disruptive. And I don't care what delivery model it is, but one of the things we've spent a lot of time on in our organization at Brown is succession planning and making sure that we always have the additional player on standby or on bench who knows enough about that project to keep it moving along.
To be able to zappy. And there's no two ways about it. It is, if they're already on the island and they're involved, it's disruptive. We had a project that, it was the one that Mike had said, we had to pull some trades off of another job. They were both IPDs, they both had the same trade partners on it. It was just to shift the manpower, and then we shifted back. So it was really pretty seamless, but the structural engineer, remain unnamed, that was originally on the project. This was a historic renovation. We had there was a center chimney that went through this historic building that had to be removed in order to put new steel. We took all the floors out and assured the building shell up, and then we came back in with all new steel floors. And we were gonna remove the chimney. It had a giant center chimney. We were gonna remove the chimney, salvage all the stone, and then historically put it back together at the end of the project. That was gonna be our glory hole to get all the steel down in. And there was a mandate imposed by the owner that we couldn't take the chimney down after we had kind of designed around that. And the structural engineer was like, there's no way to support, because the piece of chimney that had to stay weighed 20,000 pounds, and it was 60 feet up in the air, and the rest of it had to come down below it. So we had to get another structural engineer involved that could figure out how to do that, and it was extremely disruptive, extremely impactful to the project. It took a 4-month steel, structural piece with 8 months of interior fit out and change it to 8 months of structural with 4 months of fit out. So it was a huge compression at the end of the project, but, so it's not something you ever wanna do, so vetting those people early on and, making sure you have the right ones involved is critical.
It's maybe worth highlighting though that it will happen. And one of the great things about lean methodology and IPD is there are actually ways to make the project successful and adapt to all the craziness that happens on construction projects and with a whole cast of characters. And that's actually where being able to have this framework is really successful. It's not just getting the right team in the room from the get-go and then you're golden. It's actually that team is part of the constant evolution. There's a constant learning, there's dynamics around that. And, you know, bearing that in mind, I happen to row, and everyone always from shore looks at it and says, oh, it looks so beautiful, and you just do the same thing over and over again. Meanwhile, in the boat, every time you take a stroke, it's like you're doing micro adjustments, you're shifting, there are waves. No two strokes are the same, and that's kind of how IPD works, right? Every time you go to a project, it's gonna be different. It's not gonna be exactly the same, but you have the tools to be consistent and make it look like it's seamless from the outside and get to the results seamlessly.